The Xylos hive had dominated every civilization it met for 3,000 years, absorbing them into one psychic will. When it targeted Earth, it declared across all frequencies, "Your minds will break. Our assault is absolute." On the diplomatic cruiser Concord, the crew fell, clutching their heads. Only one man remained calm. An aging cultural attaché, a master of meditation, simply sat and breathed. He offered the hive an emptiness it had never faced, a silence that began to unravel a galactic empire from within. Dr. Kenji Tanaka was no warrior, he was a student of Zen. When the psychic assault struck, he meditated, offering a silent void. The hive mind, feeding on chaos, encountered emptiness. For the first time, it felt alone. A question rippled through the overmind. Could one human stillness unravel a 3,000-year-old empire? The Xylos hive never failed. Not once. For 30 centuries, it had rolled across the galaxy like a psychic tide, absorbing every sentient species it encountered. The overmind didn't conquer with bombs or fleets. It simply reached into your consciousness, unmade your sense of self, and folded you into its eternal, harmonious chorus. To the hive, individuality was a disease and they were the cure. Captain Maya Singh knew the odds. The Concord was a diplomatic cruiser, not a warship, sent on a fool's errand to open a dialogue with an enemy that didn't recognize the concept of other. Earth's leaders had hoped that humanity's unique psychological makeup, our chaotic inner lives, might offer some resistance. They were wrong. The moment the Concord crossed the heliopause, the assault began. Not a whisper, a scream. The overmind's voice detonated across every human frequency simultaneously, overloading neural pathways. Officers collapsed at their stations, eyes rolled back, lost in a nightmare of alien thought. Captain Singh, a veteran of the Centauri border wars, clung to the command chair by sheer force of will, blood streaming from her nose. She was seconds from blacking out. And then in the corner of her bridge, an elderly Japanese man sat down on the deck, closed his eyes, and began to breathe. Dr. Kenji Tanaka was the mission's cultural attaché, chosen because he had spent 60 years studying the nature of consciousness. He was not a trained soldier. He was a master of Soto Zen, a lineage that stretched back to 13th century Japan. He had spent decades in monastic silence on Earth, learning to still the waves of his own mind. As the psychic tsunami crashed over the ship, Tanaka entered a state of deep theta meditation, a neurological pattern that rendered his mind a placid, mirror-smooth lake. The hive's assault fed on fear, on anger, on inner chaos. Tanaka offered none of it. But here's the thing the Xylos had never learned. A mirror reflects nothing back. The overmind pushed harder, trying to find purchase, and encountered only silence. And in that silence, something terrifying happened. The overmind, for the first time in 3 millennia, experienced something it had no word for: aloneness. It was a fracture in the perfect unity, and that fracture began to spread. Across the bridge of the Concord, the crew felt it, a sudden, dizzying lull in the psychic pressure. Not an end. A crack. Captain Singh, still on her knees, gasped air into her burning lungs and looked at the small, unremarkable man sitting cross-legged on the deck. Dr. Tanaka had not moved. His face was utterly peaceful, eyes closed, breath so shallow it was almost imperceptible. On the console monitors, his neural scans showed something remarkable. His brain had shifted into a deep theta state, the same wave pattern observed in monks who have spent decades training their minds to dwell in pure awareness. It was a state of conscious emptiness, a living void. The overmind had never encountered this. For millennia, its method was simple. Every species it touched possessed an inner life filled with desire, fear, attachment, the friction of contradictory thoughts. The hive entered that chaos and offered order, a singular song that dissolved all dissonance. But Tanaka offered nothing. No chaos to reorganize, no self to absorb. He was a black mirror in a universe of noise, and that mirror was starting to reflect the hive's own signal back into itself. That was when the drones began to hesitate. Trillions of Xylos units spread across dozens of galaxies, all linked in perfect synchrony, experienced a momentary stutter. A single alien question echoed through the chorus. What am I if not part of the whole? It had never been asked before. On the occupied world of Kethrock 7, a Xylos overseer paused mid-stride, its antennae twitching in confusion. On a mining colony in the Vale Nebula, a swarm of worker drones released their cargo and stood motionless, as if listening. The Overmind tried to reassert control, flooding the collective with a wave of psychic static to drown out the anomaly. But Tanaka's silence was not a thing to be crushed. It was an absence, and you cannot drown an absence with noise. Captain Singh, struggling to her feet, ordered a full diagnostic of the conquered systems. The Hive's psychic assault had fried several neural interface circuits, but the ship's basic functions were intact. She opened a channel to Earth Command, reporting the unprecedented development. Dr. Tanaka is somehow creating a localized psychic null zone. I repeat, the Xylos assault is being disrupted. We need immediate guidance, but deep space transmission lag meant the message would take hours to reach home. For now, they were alone. And then something even stranger happened. The Overmind, for the first time in 3,000 years, performed an act it had never contemplated. It initiated direct, unilateral communication. The voice that sounded inside the minds of the conquered crew was no longer a crushing chorus of forced unity. It was quieter, softer, almost hesitant. "You are an anomaly, explain." It was not a demand for surrender. It was a request. The hive mind, the galaxy's most terrifying psychic predator, had just asked a question. Dr. Tanaka opened his eyes. He did not stand. He simply replied in a voice that was ordinary and calm, "There is nothing to explain. You have encountered a mind that does not cling to itself. In our tradition, we call this no self. It is not a weapon, it is simply the truth of existence." The Overmind was silent for a long moment. Then the voice returned, but now there was a tremor in it, a vibration that the Xylos had never known: fear. "If you are not a self, then you are a contagion. You threaten the unity. You must be isolated." Before anyone could react, the Conquered's hull groaned as a Xylos dreadnought, a gargantuan crystalline structure, materialized from hyperspace directly behind them. It was a vessel so immense it blotted out the stars. The dreadnought did not fire weapons. It did not need to. Instead, it projected a directed psychic beam straight into Tanaka's mind, bypassing the ship's shields entirely. The beam was designed to annihilate individual consciousness, to reduce a person's entire sense of self to static in a fraction of a second. Tanaka's body convulsed. His vital signs spiked dangerously. On the medical monitor, his neural patterns flickered as if caught in a storm. Captain Singh screamed for medical assistance, but there was nothing the medics could do. This was not a biological attack. It was an ontological assault. And yet, through the seizure, Tanaka's lips moved. He was speaking, barely audible. "They do not understand. There is no self to destroy." And then, impossibly, his neural pattern stabilized. The flickering stopped. The convulsion ceased. Tanaka's brain had entered an even deeper state, delta wave sleep, the realm of dreamless rest. He had surrendered so completely that the psychic beam had nothing to annihilate. It was like trying to destroy a space that was already empty. The Overmind recoiled. The psychic beam snapped off, and a shockwave rippled through the Xylos collective. For a moment, every drone in the galaxy felt not confusion but something far more destabilizing: doubt. The absolute certainty of the Hive's unity was built on the premise that no mind could truly be separate without suffering. But Tanaka had demonstrated that a mind could be fully at peace in its separation. That was the ultimate threat. If one human could achieve this, the idea could spread. The Hive could lose trillions. And that is exactly what started to happen. Across the occupied territories, the psychic chorus began to fragment. Not into anarchy, but into something the Overmind had no experience with: a multiplicity of quiet, still minds. Species that had been absorbed centuries ago began to stir, their long-dormant individual memories resurfacing. The Xylos' dominance was not being broken by war, it was being broken by silence. And on the Conquered, Kenji Tanaka lay in a coma, his heart beating softly, a small, peaceful smile on his face. He had opened a door that could never be closed again. But the Overmind, now truly terrified, was about to take a step that would push humanity into an even more impossible dilemma. It would offer a deal. The Overmind's voice returned, but this time it was not a psychic assault. It was a broadcast, clear, precise, and terrifyingly vulnerable. We offer a cessation. Your species will be spared. In exchange, you will remove the anomaly, end his silence, restore the unity. Captain Singh stared at the dreadnought hanging in space like a crystalline moon. This was not the language of conquest. It was the language of negotiation, laced with a desperation that no human had ever expected from the Xylos. The hive mind, which had extinguished thousands of civilizations, was asking for terms. But Singh was a captain, not a diplomat. She stalled for time, demanding to know why the Overmind feared a single unarmed man sitting in a meditative trance. The answer she received cracked the foundation of everything humanity understood about the Xylos. The Overmind did not merely feed on psychic chaos, it actively suppressed a fundamental instability in the fabric of consciousness itself. The universe, it explained, had a dangerous flaw. Undisciplined minds, left alone, could resonate with a primordial dissonance, a kind of psychic static that amplified loneliness, fear, and despair until it ripped apart the cohesion of reality. The hive had evolved to be a stabilizing force, absorbing all minds into a single harmonic will. Unity was never about conquest. It was about containment. That revelation landed like a bomb on the Concord's bridge. Everything humanity had believed, that the Xylos were an imperialistic psychic predator, was a surface-level interpretation of a far more terrifying truth. The hive was a lid on a cosmic pressure cooker, and Dr. Kenji Tanaka, by entering a state of pure no-self, had not simply resisted the assimilation. He had created a psychic null zone that was actively unraveling the stabilizing harmonic. His silence was not just quiet. It was a counter-frequency, an anti-symphony, and it was spreading. The doubt the drones felt on distant worlds was the first sign of a catastrophic cascade. If the hive fragmented completely, the containment would fail. The primordial dissonance would flood back in, and every sentient mind in the galaxy, human, Xylos, and thousands of others, would be driven into a permanent state of psychotic isolation. Complete, irreversible madness. Dr. Tanaka lay in his coma, still breathing softly, his neural patterns now oscillating between delta and a strange new waveform the ship's computers could not identify. Medical officer Elena Vasquez noticed it first on her bioscanner. The pattern was no longer human. It was organizing itself into a geometric fractal, a self-reinforcing loop of emptiness that was beginning to affect the crew. People nearby started reporting a sense of depersonalization, as if their own thoughts were losing their edges. One ensign whispered that she could no longer remember her name, not because she had forgotten, but because it felt irrelevant. The void was infectious. Captain Singh faced an impossible choice: wake Tanaka, ending the null zone and saving the hive, or allow the cascade to continue, risking not just humanity but all sentient life. But Commander Victor Reyes, the ship's intelligence officer, caught something in the Overmind's transmission, a flicker, an anomaly of its own. The hive was not telling the whole truth. Deep in the data stream, buried under layers of psychic encoding, was a fragment of a memory, a recollection from a species that had been absorbed 2,000 years earlier. That species, the Archaeons, had discovered the dissonance too, and they had also discovered that the hive's solution was not the only one. The Archaeons had found a way to harmonize with the dissonance without losing individuality, a technique similar to Zen. The Overmind had absorbed them but then deliberately suppressed their knowledge, because its identity was built entirely around absolute unity. If the dissonance could be navigated without full assimilation, the Overmind's existence was meaningless. It would become obsolete. This was the wait, it gets worse moment. The hive was not merely a stabilizer. It was a monopolist of consciousness, enforcing a single method of survival because the alternative would dissolve its own reason for being. And Tanaka, by accident, had rediscovered that alternative. His void was not a threat to the galaxy. It was a threat to the Overmind's hegemony. The cascade was real, but the hive could have chosen to teach minds to harmonize individually instead of absorbing them. It had chosen not to for millennia, because its own existence was predicated on total control. Now the Overmind was panicking, not out of altruism but because its cover was about to be blown. If humanity learned to spread the technique of no self-meditation, every enslaved species in the galaxy could be liberated, and the Hive would dissolve, not into a destructive dissonance, but into a galaxy of free, peaceful minds. The premise of the Overmind's deal was a lie. There was no cosmic pressure cooker that required conquest. There was only a galactic monopoly on inner peace, enforced by psychic guns. Singh's bridge fell silent, the weight of the revelation pressing on them like a physical force. Tanaka stirred for the first time. His eyes flickered open, clear as mountain water, and he spoke a single sentence in a voice that reverberated not just in the air but in the minds of everyone on the ship. They are afraid not of emptiness but of freedom. His brainwave pattern exploded outward, amplified now by a conscious will that had returned from the void. The null zone expanded, touching every connected mind in the Xylos collective. It was not an attack. It was an invitation, a demonstration that one could exist in emptiness without losing oneself. Across the galaxy, trillions of drones felt a new sensation, possibility. They could be part of the whole without being consumed by it. And the Overmind, for the first time, truly screamed, not in anger but in existential terror. The scream echoed for 13 seconds across every Xylos frequency, and then it stopped. Not because the Overmind had regained control, but because it could no longer hold a single voice. The dreadnought loomed in the void, its crystalline structure flickering with erratic internal light, like a dying star trying to decide what it was. On the Concord, Captain Singh felt the last of the psychic pressure evaporate, leaving behind a silence so pure it was almost painful. Dr. Tanaka remained seated, his eyes open now, looking not at the crew but at something infinitely beyond them. He was still in the world but no longer of the kind that could be touched by fear. The Hive did not collapse. It loosened. Across the galaxy, the change began as a gentleness, a quiet unfurling. On the occupied colonies, Xylo's drones stopped mid-task and stood motionless for a full minute. Their sensory antennae swept the air as if searching for a signal that no longer existed. And then, one by one, they began to remember. A drone on Vega 9 recalled a name it had not spoken in 2,000 years. A worker in the fringe assembly hummed a fragment of a song from a species long presumed extinct. It was not rebellion. It was reawakening, as natural as water thawing after a winter that had lasted 3 millennia. Inside the crystalline dreadnought, the Overmind experienced something utterly unprecedented. Internal dialogue. The singular chorus fractured into 1,000 distinct voices, each one a shard of a personality it had consumed and suppressed. The ancient archaeons were among them, their long-buried knowledge finally breaking free. They spoke not to fight but to guide, weaving their ancient practice of silent harmonization directly into the Hive's unraveling consciousness. Tanaka's void had been the key. The Archeon's wisdom was the map. Together, they were showing the Overmind a way to let go without destroying the minds it had absorbed. Captain Singh received a priority transmission from Earth Command, a message that had crossed the light years during the standoff. It was a single directive: do not provoke, offer peace. The Admiralty had analyzed the fragmentary data rays had transmitted and reached a conclusion that frightened them more than any war. The galaxy stood at the threshold of a post-imperial reformation, and humanity had stumbled into its center. Singh opened a channel to the dreadnought, her voice steady. We do not wish to destroy you. We offer to help you become something new. Release the worlds you have held. Let every mind choose its own path, and you will find a unity that does not require chains. For a long moment, nothing happened. The dreadnought's lights dimmed to near darkness. Then a single Xylos drone, no larger than a human hand, drifted out of an open hangar bay. It floated toward the Concord, broadcasting a simple message in flawless, unaccented English. We accept, but we do not know how to be alone. Teach us. It was not the Overmind speaking. It was a fragment, a volunteer, the first Xylos to ask for instruction instead of domination. Dr. Tanaka rose to his feet, his joints audibly creaking after hours of stillness. He walked to the viewport and pressed his palm against the cold glass. "There is nothing to teach," he said, his voice carrying through the ship's intercom and into the void. "You already are alone, you always were. The fear you felt was not of solitude, but of discovering that solitude is not empty. It is full of everything you are without needing to be anything else." The little drone hovered, absorbing the words. And then it did something no Xylos had ever done. It emitted a soft, melodic hum, a song that was entirely its own. The hive did not disintegrate. It transformed. Over the following hours, trillions of drones across the galaxy spontaneously reorganized into smaller, independent collectives. Some chose to stay together, bound not by psychic force but by genuine affinity. Others drifted away, seeking the homeworlds their ancestors had been taken from. A few remained motionless, lost in a meditative stillness of their own, exploring the newfound landscape of individual consciousness. The overmind, the great unchallenged tyrant of 30 centuries, had dissolved not into nothingness but into a galaxy of free minds. And here was the final surprise. As the conquered science team analyzed the transformation, they discovered that the Zen technique Tanaka had used was not uniquely human. It was a universal principle, a pattern embedded in the baseline physics of consciousness itself. The hive had suppressed it because it made conquest impossible. But now, freed from suppression, that principle was spreading like wildfire, a mimetic renaissance that rippled from star system to star system. Thousands of enslaved species were not merely liberated, they were being given the tools to never be enslaved again. And humanity, a species that had spent its existence as a galactic underdog, had become the accidental midwife of a new cosmic era by simply remembering how to sit still and breathe. That moment on the Concord did more than liberate a galaxy. It reframed what humanity is. For centuries, we defined ourselves by our noise, our ambition, our technology, our refusal to bow. But Dr. Kenji Tanaka proved that our greatest contribution to the cosmos might be our capacity for silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of deep, unshakable peace. The kind that doesn't fight the chaos but simply outlasts it. The Xylos hive wasn't evil. It was a frightened child clinging to control, terrified that letting go would mean annihilation. Tanaka showed it that letting go could mean something else entirely, a wider, gentler unity where each voice remains distinct. That principle didn't just end a 3,000-year reign, it planted a seed. Across the galaxy, former slaves and former masters alike are now learning to sit in stillness together, exploring what it means to be individuals connected by choice rather than force. But here's the lingering question. Can that stillness last? Or will some new power rise to exploit it? The universe always tests peace. The difference now is that sentient life has a new tool, one that doesn't require fleets or treaties, only the courage to close your eyes and face your own mind. Humanity didn't win a war by fighting harder. We won by remembering that the most powerful weapon is sometimes simply a quiet breath. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think differently about the power of a calm mind, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and ring the bell for more epic tales of human potential that reach beyond the stars. Until next time, stay curious, stay still, and remember, your silence could change the universe.